Right. Remember, throughout the show, to follow us on social media at NextRevFNC and Steve Hilton X. Tell us what you think and join tonight's conversation. Let's start with the big event of the week. Not one specific thing, but a combination of things that for me marked a turning point. For decades, America was run by an establishment ideology backing globalization, automation, centralization, and uncontrolled immigration. Republicans and Democrats alike pushed policies that favored global business, disruptive technology, centralization of power in the hands of the technocratic administrative state, and a ready supply of cheap imported labor. This ideology brought huge benefits to the elite themselves, but to the 80% or so of Americans outside the booming centers of the knowledge economy, incomes went down, jobs went away, and the social fabric was torn by family breakdown and community disintegration. Donald Trump was elected to overturn this elitist ideology. But this week it became clear that the elite has a new ideology. And this time it's got nothing to do with policy. It's much simpler and less rational. The new elitist ideology is hatred of Donald Trump and his supporters. The elitists say they're against populist bigotry and xenophobia. Xenophobia means fear and hatred of strangers. Is there any better description of how senior FBI officers thought of Trump supporters? Lazy, uneducated, POS, pieces of SHIT, to be polite, as revealed in this week's IG report. The elitists say Donald Trump is undermining the rule of law, but they fawn over James Comey, who, as was also revealed this week, went rogue at the FBI and put himself above the law. The elites don't care about the rule of law, they just hate Trump. They say Donald Trump is undermining democratic norms, but they continue to try and delegitimize a president who was duly elected according to the Constitution. They don't care about democratic norms, they just hate Trump. This week, they condemned the president for being nice to dictator Kim Jong-un. But there's much more cruelty and human rights abuse in China, and the elite have been sucking up to them for decades. At least with President Trump, the motive was avoiding nuclear war. The elite's China suck-up was just about greed. Look at Bill Maher saying out loud what every Democrat and never Trump Republican thinks, hoping for a recession so Donald Trump won't get credit for helping working Americans. Look at Nancy Pelosi trying to turn anything positive into a negative. There is nothing. Not more jobs, not higher incomes, not even less risk of nuclear war that matters more to these elitists than their unhinged hatred of Donald Trump and everyone he stands for. That is the new elitist ideology. Their brand is hate. So, no introductions needed to this panel. By the way, when we announced the lineup tonight, Jason, I got a lot of tweets saying, good luck to Jason Chaffetz getting a word in. So, you know, I just like sitting here. Exactly. This is great. I'm good. My job, especially on Father's Day, is to make sure you do get a word with. But having said that, I want to start with you, Kimberly.
Yes, and happy Father's Day to you guys.
I just think wonderful dads out there. I just want to start with one bit of the elite, and that's the establishment Republicans. I just think that, you know, they hate Trump just as much as the Democrats do, but they never stop for one moment to realize that it's their mistakes, their policy failures that led to Donald Trump being elected. They have no humility about their role in all of this.
Yes, and also, no honesty about the process. We arrived at this point because of the failures of the past, really of both sides. And you would think that for once they have somebody who's a winner on their team, putting points on the board, actually producing results as it relates to jobs and the economy, record low unemployment amongst blacks, Hispanics, women, minorities. You think that would be something that would be positive, that they could build a party and build a brand on, and instead they don't give the support to the president, to Donald Trump, even for North Korea, et cetera. It's always something negative, and you see that with the left, and you see that with some of the elite conservatives and the Republican Party that don't want to have an honest dialogue about the successes of this president. Instead of joining together and working together as a positive movement, moving forward, moving on target to specific goals to ensure getting wins in the midterm, ensuring re-election. They're not. They're being disruptive in a haphazard way that is counterproductive, and it's also illogical.
I know, Jason, look, the thing is, I mean, you were there with all these characters. I think the never Trump Republicans really interest me because it seems to me that, okay, you'd expect the Democrats, you know, to sort of have a go at the president, whatever, although not with the viciousness that you see. But the establishment, Republicans, it seems to me, want him to fail just as much as the Democrats do.
Well, the good news is that America figured it out, and they figured it out before anybody in the Beltway. But the establishment Republicans have a constituency where they raise a certain amount of money from a certain group of elitists. But Donald Trump did something that a disruptive person does, and that is he went right to the people and made the case. And it took a while for some people to see. It took me a little while to see. But you know what? I'm convinced more than ever that he is the only person that could have pulled this off. Because of his great success in business, because of the things that he was able to build, he went into this and just said, I'm going to put America first. I'm going to do what's right for the country. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I'm going to tell it exactly the way it is. America responded, and he blew him out of the water. And there's not a single person in this country right now that could even challenge, let alone beat Donald Trump to become the president.
And the thing is, it's not just the rhetoric anymore. We've actually got the results. You're actually seeing the results of having a pro-business, pro-worker president in the White House. You're actually seeing it in more jobs and higher wages. But, Anne, I just noticed you got a new book coming out, and
I do.
It seems to me that the theme of that is very much in line with the kind of meltdown that I perceive is going on with the elites about Donald Trump.
Yes, I can't talk about it yet, although Kimberly is mentioned in it very favorably, the only person on Fox News. I was so happy I thought of that.
Well, I'm very upset to hear she's the only person. Exactly.
It's an exciting little item. I bet you even forgot you said it, but it was good. So I can't talk about it, but I do completely agree with your point. We need to disband the official Republican Party. I think that was the point you were making, and I completely agree wholeheartedly. I'm sorry, Representative, but I mean, everything,
I quit, so.
Everything you said is right. It kind of depresses me because I feel like we're at the end of the campaign, because you are right. He appealed to the people, and it was the first time I hated the Republican Party. I've been a Republican my entire life, but they were exposed as a uniparty, like you say, indistinguishable from the Democrats. It's for the rich, it's for the donors. But I got to tell you, since he's been president, he's been okay, I know he's up against a lot, but man, the swamp has been moving in. And the idea that what we're worried about now is another amnesty? Oh my gosh, that's what the Republicans are pushing through. I feel like I'm in a nightmare. And on Monday, Trump is so great, and I would
by
say,
the way, we'll talk about immigration then a little bit later on. So save.
I will. I just want to say one thing, but generally about Trump, and this is true of young people taking exams, and also Donald Trump. You know, when you're taking the SATs, they say your first guess is probably right. That is always true with Donald Trump. Always true with him. Whatever his instinct is, that's right. And then Mark Short goes to him, or Gary Cohn, or the rest of them. And the RNC people, sorry, your people again. They go to him and say,
we got to defend you against these unwarranted.
No, the RNC won't like it. Mitch McConnell won't like it. No, please, Donald Trump, go with your first answer.
Let's sort of keep going on this thing, because I think this is really the interesting part, the Republican bit of this, not so much the Democrats. So talking about, but anyone chime in, but John Boehner was out recently. He's sort of wandering around saying, well, the Republican Party, I don't know where it is, it's taking a nap. That was his phrase. The Republicans somewhere taking a nap. Hang on a second. When his Republican Party was so corrupt. I mean, there's this thing that was called the John Boehner toll booth, where he literally would advance legislation in the House only if the business interests who would benefit from it paid money. Gave money. I mean, it's like total corruption. That's what people had sick and tired of.
There was a reaction against that. I mean, he wasn't popular. People viewed him as ineffectual in terms of being able to get anything forward in the conservative agenda and putting up some wins for the Republican Party. So when he left, it's like, okay, well, Donald Trump came in and has basically single-handedly had to produce these results. And they are just upset that he's almost been so successful at it. I mean, it's really sad that they're this hypocritical.
I just want Republicans to do what Republicans said they were going to do.
Right.
Remember, we campaigned on, it was a winning message, we were going to cut spending in Washington, D.C. After I left, one of the biggest increases in domestic spending in the history of the United States of America. So, we didn't do those types of things. Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, and several of these people make this comment time and time again. Let's just actually do what we campaigned we would do, and the country would be better off. And that happens to be where Donald Trump wants to go. But we do have squishy people, particularly in the Senate. I can make a case that the House actually does put forward more conservative legislation. But as all good bills go to do, they die in the United States Senate. They don't vote on hard things. They
This
don't
week
actually push
isn't a
these.
good week for that argument when the House is desperately pushing through amnesty. Not a good week to say the House is better than the Senate.
The president is going up to Capitol Hill on Tuesday, and I think it'll be interesting to see where that ends up, because there's a lot of us who don't believe that amnesty is the solution.
You know what happened Friday? Trump, again, first thing he says, I'm not going to sign this bill. And then his advisors go rushing to him. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, sir.
The immigration ones, but also the same thing happened with the massive spending thing, right? With the omnibus. We had to go about. I think the last time you were here, when we were literally sitting around the table.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's just such irresponsible, rampant spending. And when you have someone come in like President Trump, and he promised the working men and women that he was going to be responsible with their hard-earned money, put more of it in their wallets versus government spending and waste to just throw money and pork at their constituents to try to get reelected, only serving their own interests and not thinking about the efficiency of government.
Yeah.
That's why he came in and said, I'm going to cut back, roll back on some of these regulations, put a pro-growth economy in place. And that's what he's been doing, because he knows how to do. He's a businessman with common sense, and he doesn't have people that he's trying to suck up to that is really hurting the American
We got
people.
the pro-growth part of it, right?
Yeah.
But we still look at the massive spending. We're spending almost $1 billion a day in interest on our national debt. It's that big and that massive.
Well, listen, more to come, especially on immigration, so don't worry about that.
She's excited.
Exactly, I know. And the last point,
work it in
my last thought is, I always said that it's not just, it's not enough. It's great, have the populist revolution take the White House, but you've got to have the support throughout the system.
You do.
And that's what we're seeing in a lot of these cases. All right, coming up, last week Swamp Watch took on Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and his business interests. Well, guess who was watching? Wilbur Ross. You'll hear his response later in the show. And next, the panel and I will talk about immigration, especially how the elites are trying to use the booming Trump economy as an excuse for more immigration. We'll debate that next. This program is Tuesday to see if they can hash out a deal. Meanwhile, as the economy takes off under Trumponomics, big business jumped on data showing there are now more job vacancies than there are people unemployed to demand a loosening of immigration rules so they can import more cheap labor. There's just one problem. We still have one of the lowest labour participation rates in the Western world. If we had just the UK's rate, for example, that would mean millions more Americans in work. So here's an idea for you fat cats in corporate America. Instead of lazily importing foreign workers, why don't you spend some of your profits training American workers so they can take the jobs that the booming economy is creating? And, Coulter, your favourite topic. Can we just start with this sort of the sort of sadly predictable response to economic success that, it means we need more immigration?
It is strange. It's the one thing rich people, very rich people, don't brag about. You know how people are always bragging about how expensive their cars are and how much the bottle of wine is and this refrigerator I got. No, but the one thing they don't want to brag about how much they're spending on is human labor. No, when it comes to that, you're Nancy Pelosi or Sheldon Adelson, whomever. I don't mean to pick on him, but they just want cheaper and cheaper and cheaper labor. And there is no better example of your swamp than the fact that the signature issue that this historic candidate ran on, the Republicans in the House are doing the exact opposite, trying to push through an amnesty, or as a host on an earlier Fox show today said, and people are going to, conservatives are going to call this amnesty an amnesty. So watch out for those crazy right-wingers.
Okay, so let's. I just want to focus on this. There's a sort of slightly sort of nerdy policy thing here that I want to get to, which is this labour participation point, because. Of course, it's true that when the economy grows rapidly, as we're seeing now, there's a crunch, and you hear it all the time, but we can't find workers. That's true. But it's also true that you've got so many people sitting on the sidelines. The unemployment rate is falling to historic lows, but the labour participation rate isn't changing very much. It's people who may be affected by opioids, or they don't have the skills, or they've given up. Corporate America could do so much more to help those Americans before just saying, bring us in more immigrants.
Well, and that's where the expense of all the social safety network is, and that when you start to get the labor participation rates up, then you get a more productive economy. You've got better people feel better about themselves. They contribute. And then you don't spend as much on welfare and doing all these programs and just giving a handout all the time.
Yeah.
But look, immigration goes hand in glove with this. I mean, we just had the Secretary of Homeland Security today go out and say, look, they're not coming to the port of entry. They're trying to go in between. And then we have this debate about whether or not we should spend, out of a $46 trillion expenditure that we're going to go through in this country over the next 10 years, should we spend $25 billion building a wall to help our border patrol? I mean, it's ridiculous. So, I reject amnesty. I don't think that's the way to do it. I feel a higher moral obligation for the person who's trying to come in here legally and lawfully.
Right.
That's the person I want to have come in this country.
Or the American trying to get a job.
So, Kimberly, look, let's bring it up to date. We got these bills going on in the House next week, and the president's weighing in. I think he tweeted about it just recently tonight. What do you see is the potential for anything happening here?
Yeah, well, I think he'll do a better job of coming up with a fresh new idea himself, because these people have failed in the past. They'll fail him again. They don't know how to build a coalition or get anybody to work together. And it's just a bunch of crybabies, and they're not serving the American people. Why aren't we using and employing the people here, making them feel better about themselves? I'm all for giving somebody a helping hand, but you're not helping anybody by continuing to give handouts. Why don't we do something to get these people engaged in the workforce? For the first time now, we have more jobs than people to be able to even fill them. So we've got to get that labor participation rate up. And the answer isn't amnesty. Let's just flood the market, bring some more people in, or allow people to stay that have broken the law to begin with. There's a legal process that needs to be observed and respected. That's why you got to build the wall and secure the borders, and everybody needs to take their turn and get in line. That's why I'm very frustrated with people blaming the president, saying he's mean-spirited, getting upset about children being separated. Don't break the law. Don't bring your family over illegally and then blame us when you have total disregard for the laws that we have on the books. We're a nation of immigrants, right? That's great. We encourage people to come in, follow the rules, wait your turn in line. We will take care of you. But we are going to employ the people who are here lawfully, the citizens that should be working, and make them feel better about themselves.
Well, I mean, and just to pick up on that, everyone's talking about this child separation thing. Isn't it very clear? The humane alternative to separating children from their families is build the wall.
Yes.
Then you won't have anyone coming.
Yes.
Isn't that so?
Well, I quoted the most quoted federal judge in my book, Adios America, Richard Posner.
Yes.
Lawyers will know who he is, and hardly a conservative. And, 20 years ago, he wrote a concurrence to an opinion that involved anchor babies to say, we've got to stop this. He was talking about anchor babies, but it's the same thing with the wall. As long as people can come here,
by the way,
drop
some
a
people
baby,
really hate that.
start getting.
That's a term that a lot of people have a problem with, isn't it?
Because they have a problem with any way we can communicate about immigration. Their strategy, don't let people think about immigration, don't let them know any facts. Anchor baby, there's nothing racial, there's nothing sexual. It means you anchor the child here, and then the child can bring in all the relatives. It's a boating metaphor. So, yeah, they're upset about it because it allows people to discuss immigration.
And then chain migration.
But look, back then, Posner said, as long as you incentivize people to come here from south of the border, they're going to keep dying crossing through the desert as long as you keep that magnet on. And what greater magnet than citizenship, than Medicare, Medicaid, free health care? Yeah, that's why people voted for a wall. And I would also say one other thing. These child actors weeping and crying on all the other networks 24/7 right now. Do not fall for it, Mr. President. I get very nervous about the president getting his news from TV because I also have an Adios America. A New Yorker article. New Yorker is not a conservative publication. They describe.
So I told you we wouldn't get a word in. I told you.
These kids are being
I'm so sorry. We have to go.
They're given scripts to read by liberals, according to the New Yorker. Don't fall for the actor children.
Okay. Thank you for getting that off your chest.
You're welcome.
Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross responds to last week's Swan Watch about him. Still ahead. But next, the Supreme Court is set to rule on a landmark case that could change the very face of American politics and could affect the size of your paycheck. We're going to be back in just a moment.
Sarah.
Welcome back, everyone. The Supreme Court is about to rule on a huge case which should change the face of politics in America by drastically undercutting one of the main sources of funding and support for the Democrats, public sector unions. At the heart of the case, known as Janus versus AFSCME, is the practice of those unions charging agency fees to workers who don't want to join the union but who benefit from deals that it bargains. Those fees are mandatory and only slightly lower than full union dues. So what does it all mean? Joining me now, Executive Director of the Empire Center for Public Policy, Tim Hofer. Tim is one of the big experts on this, so I'd love you just to explain for us the real significance of this, particularly how much money is potentially at stake for the public sector unions. Some of the numbers I've seen around this are really huge.
Yeah, so we're talking about roughly 5 million government employees across the country who are going to be affected by this decision. In New York alone, which represents about 1 in 5 of those employees, 1.2 million government employees are in the state of New York. Roughly 200,000 of them have already exercised their right to opt out of the union. So on the day that Janus comes down, assuming that it goes for Mark, you're looking at roughly $110 million taken out of union coffers on day one.
And then what's the state of play around the rest of the country in terms of the state's different sort of policies on this issue? How does that work out?
The state's policies are, they're definitely by state. Every state has their own individual. We're looking at, we're looking at numbers on this that are significant. 5 million across just over 20 states, and you're talking about 5 million employees from a high of 1.3 in California to 1.2 in New York, down to as low as maybe 80,000.
So how long has this case been sort of going through the system, and when do you think we can expect a ruling? What are you looking at?
This case was heard in February, though it's a continuation of a case that was heard back in 2016, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. The ruling is expected any day now. The Supreme Court will hand down decisions tomorrow. It could be then. It could be as late as the end of their session, which is roughly the 27th or 28th of this month.
And so when people say this is going to have a big impact on the Democrats, let's just unpack that a bit, because there's the money, but there's also the organization, right? The campaigning and the support, and in many ways it's such a core part of the Democratic Party's operations, isn't it? That's what's really at stake here. How are they reacting to this potentially fatal blow? Well, not fatal, but crippling blow.
Well, I guess I'd correct that just a touch and talk about the government unions as a movement in themselves. Certainly here in New York and in states across the country, the unions are a political force that are reckoned to be dealt with. They organize. They are involved in lobbying at state houses and the federal government. They are involved in political campaigns at every level of government. So every dollar that comes away from them is going to have an impact on their ability to organize, their ability to impact policy, and their ability to impact elections.
Tim, thank you so much. That's a really great summary of all of that. We're going to watch for the result eagerly, but really appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Jason, let's go to you on this. The role of the public sector unions, I think, is just so interesting in this country. And I want to sort of put it in the context of the populist movement and the kind of pro-worker agenda. It seems to me that in many ways, private sector unions are actually, if anything, too weak in America. You've got lots of abuses against workers in the private sector, but the role of public sector workers, unions, is incredibly negative, it seems to me, in terms of blocking reform and lobbying in the ways we've just heard. I mean, it's a really big deal.
Oh, this is a very important Supreme Court ruling, because really what they're able to do is take millions and millions of dollars, galvanize thousands upon thousands of people, and make no mistake about it, they're going to spend 100% of their time lobbying to elect Democrats. These are federal workers that many of them work 100% of their time on union activities. So they may have a federal...
Is that really true?
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely true. They will spend 100% of their time. They'll take a federal taxpayer dollars.
Right.
They'll get benefits. They'll get health care.
Right.
But they spend 100% of their time working on union activities.
And it doesn't count as campaign spending.
Why?
That's right.
Is that right?
Yep.
Why is that?
Because it's union.
Amazing.
And we're funding
stunning.
it. The taxpayers are funding it. So
It's one of the biggest grifts of all time. I mean, this is really corruption at the highest level. Talk about draining the swamp. Like, start with the unions there. They're literally actively campaigning, working on behalf of Democratic candidates. Their whole movement to be able to get out the vote. They're doing phone banks. They're there on election day, literally while they're on the federal dime and getting paid in health care, just to be able to put forward their own candidates. And they use the power of the unions to be able to also then boycott other people or create mess and hysteria and total pandemonium so that nobody can get any business done, and they shut you down.
So you got to starve the beast. And when they take in millions of dollars, what the Supreme Court's looking at is making sure, if you're, let's say there's a union and you decide, hey, I don't want to be in that union, they're still going to take up to 78% of the dues out of your own check, even though you said, I don't want in on it. They take that money and they pour it into the union, even if you didn't want to do it.
Yeah, it's compulsory.
I just want to make the point that there should not be any public sector union, something FDR believed and George Meany. The whole point of a union, and they're always pretending they're like steel workers and pipe
Yes,
fitters.
that's such an important point.
Their boss.
They call themselves Labour. They literally say Labour.
Okay, but why do you normally have a union if you're a steel worker or, pipe fitter? It's because you have a jackbooted capitalist oppressor on the other side, and his profit, he makes more profit the less money he pays you. Okay, on the other side of a government union is the guy who needs your vote and needs all that organizing that Jason's talking about. So they're buying their own bosses. There's no profit motive. It's government. It's utterly, completely corrupt from the get-go.
That's
and there are now
brilliant.
more
You know that
helping
so well.
the worker.
Honestly, I love it when people give intellectual backup to my prejudices. So I always have this sense that I actually like the steel. The steel do need protection more and more, frankly, in our economy today.
And they're getting smaller and weaker. Exactly.
Yeah, but they're getting robbed. You see that they have these compulsory dues. They take all their money. They're not doing anything to help them. The working men and women that are actually in the unions. They are using them.
Yes.
Okay, and making them. It's like forced, labor for them for their political candidates.
And also, they block. The other thing is the lobbying function that we heard about. That they block really important reform, like school reforms that would benefit children. Often the poorest children, who are the biggest victims of school failure, is the public sector unions that stop that.
You see, like in education, it's shameful.
And what they'll do is they will couple themselves with somebody like, say, a Planned Parenthood. And what Planned Parenthood will do is they'll take all these physical facilities all around the country and they'll say, hey, we do women's health. But on the part-time, what they do is the unions will come in and they'll use those physical facilities to gather, organize, and get out the vote. And Republicans are left looking around like, where's our... But it's all funded by the taxpayers. That's what's so outrageous.
Well, look, really big deal. Great discussion. Thank you very much. Coming up, remember this from last week? Does the president know that the man negotiating tariffs designed to protect American workers from imports is making money from shipping those imports to America? Our Swamp Watch on Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross got a huge response, including from Wilbur Ross. You won't want to miss what he had to say, and that's next. Last week, we took a look at apparent conflicts of interest over trade and tariffs for Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in a Swamp Watch helped by our friends at the Government Accountability Institute. It caused quite a stir, and so tonight we're going to bring you Secretary Ross's response and answer some of your questions too. Wilbur Ross is tonight's Swamp Watch follow-up. Now, I'm all for getting people with business experience into government. That's especially true for positions that affect policy towards the private sector. You want people who know what they're talking about. But the American people also want to know that when business leaders serve in government, they're representing the interests of all American business, not just their own business. Guess who co-founded the shipping firm bringing steel here from South Korea, Nautical Bulk Holdings, and who remains an owner? It's kind of unbelievable, even for regular viewers of Swamp Watch, but the answer is Wilbur Ross. He's negotiating over South Korean steel imports while making money from importing South Korean steel. Did Wilbur Ross tell President Trump about these conflicts? Does the president know that the man negotiating tariffs designed to protect American workers from imports is making money from shipping those imports to America? Last week, we told you that Wilbur Ross owns stakes in Nautical Bulk Holdings, which does significant business delivering South Korean steel, subject to Commerce Department tariff negotiations. We told you he owns stakes in the Transportation Recovery Fund, which ships auto parts that could be hit by President Trump's promised auto tariffs. We told you he also owns stakes in Navigator Holdings, an oil and gas shipping firm whose clients include a major Turkish oil company that could be affected by sanctions being considered by the Commerce Department. We told you that he partially owns Diamond S Shipping, which has a long list of clients whose business could be affected by Commerce Department policy, including Chinese state-owned oil company PetroChina. We told you that in November 2017, 8 months after joining the administration, Ross pledged to divest from his ownership of Navigator Holdings and Diamond S Shipping. But we told you accurately that there was no evidence he'd done that. We told you that Ross's chief of staff, Wendy Teramoto, is still, as far as we know, listed as a director at Nautical Bulk Shipping, a company tied to Nautical Bulk Holdings. In response to all this, Secretary Ross's office contacted us after the show and provided us the following statement, which addresses some, but not all, of what we reported. Listen carefully. First, the issue of divestments and the Secretary's chief of staff. Quote, Secretary Ross has fully divested in accordance with his ethics agreement filed with the Office of Government Ethics and has also divested of Navigator and other assets, even though not required to do so under his ethics agreement. He continues to seek out and follow the guidance of Department of Commerce ethics officials to ensure compliance with federal regulations. For the assets the Secretary owns, ethics officials have not found Section 232 investigations or general trade negotiations to have a direct and predictable effect on those assets, which is the legal standard. Additionally, Wendy Teramoto resigned from all boards prior to becoming chief of staff. Right, a few points here. First, his statement only refers to divestment of one of the two companies we mentioned. Secondly, here's the website where such divestments would and should be listed as required. The latest transaction listed is in November 2017 and reports sales of Sun Bancorp, an unrelated company. No transactions have been posted since, including any related to the sale of Navigator Holdings or Diamond Shipping, as Wilbur Ross had promised. We say clearly tonight, if there is evidence of Secretary Ross's divestments, show it to us. You've had a week, and we will happily show our viewers. On his chief of staff, again, Wendy Teramoto's name remains listed tonight as director at Nautical Bulk Shipping on this Government of Bermuda website. Bermuda is where the company's based. On the rest of our report, Secretary Ross's office says, quote, much of this report is based on half-truths, falsehoods and assumptions that frankly do not make much sense. In a few words, both Mr. Hilton and GAI conflated shipments with ships. The two are not the same. One ship can carry hundreds or even thousands of so-called shipments, and the shipments noted represent a fraction of the ship's total use. Additionally, the Secretary holds a small percentage interest in a fund which in turn has partial ownership of Nautical Holdings. Note that the Secretary's own statement confirms the central conflict of interest here, that with one hand, Wilbur Ross partially owns a company that ships South Korean steel to the US, and with the other hand, he's negotiating tariffs on South Korean steel imports. Wilbur Ross also added, the Secretary will continue to implement the President's bold trade agenda focused on righting the wrongs committed against both our American workers and our country's national security under previous administrations. Let me repeat, I am all for successful and experienced business people like Wilbur Ross serving in government. That's good. What's not good is when they hide behind pathetic, swampy ethics rules that a child could see through. In this case, they are literally claiming that negotiations on steel tariffs don't affect a company that imports steel. You can argue all day about what constitutes a shipment and how much steel is in a shipment, but you're still shipping steel. They also argue that potential oil sanctions on Venezuela don't affect a company that ships oil from Venezuela. This is the kind of legalistic BS we got from the crooked Clintons. When you're serving in the administration of a president who is elected to drain the swamp, we expect a higher standard. I read all your tweets about this last week, and some of you suggested we had made a mistake because Wilbur Ross's interests are in a blind trust, which would remove any potential conflicts of interest. Well, we looked into that. And I'm afraid it's not the case. This is Secretary Ross's official ethics agreement with the Office of Government Ethics. This is where any relevant blind trust would be listed, but the document never mentions any blind trust. The truth is, the Office of Government Ethics is a swampy joke. It allowed Bill Clinton to make millions in speaking fees from foreign entities while his wife was Secretary of State. It allowed President Obama's Commerce Secretary, Penny Pritzker, to hand out a $10 million grant to a company co-chaired by her own cousin. You know our promise to you on this show. Drain the swamp was one of Donald Trump's most important promises, and we will hold everyone to account for cronyism, corruption, and conflicts of interest without fear or favor. The Office of Government Ethics needs a complete overhaul, and we will get to that on another night. In the meantime, a message to Wilbur Ross, who, by the way, we've repeatedly invited on the show to discuss all this. Secretary Ross, as you know better than most, in the business world, there is a very clear standard for conflicts of interest like these. You recuse yourself from any relevant decision making. Please, Mr. Secretary, do the right thing. We will discuss all that with our guests here after the break. Don't go away.
How do you...
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get into it. Wilbur Ross, the Office of Government Ethics and all that. It seems to me, Jason, that the Office of Government Ethics and the ethics rules generally are actually the real problem here.
Well, yes. Like openness and transparency, I believe in it. The sunlight is the best disinfectant. You want to draw sunshine to it if you want to clean up the mess. And wherever that takes you, it takes you. But the Office of Government Ethics has been a bit of a joke. A while ago, we got the report as to which personnel within each department and agency were actually paying their taxes. They're taking taxpayer dollars. And guess who had the lowest compliance rate of paying their federal taxes? The Office of Government Ethics.
That's brilliant.
It was
Subject of a new
that's what I was going to say.
Yes.
We're going to do swap watch. That's, oh my, I mean, that's...
You have almost 100,000 federal workers that don't pay about $1 billion a year in taxes, and they take money from the taxpayers. I would love to come to a segment about that.
That's a promise.
Well, I told you I'm friends with Wilbur Ross, so I found his response totally persuasive and can't believe you are picking on an honorable man. But there are other people I think you could be picking on, and I think you should suggest that viewers send in their nominations.
Brilliant.
I would like an entire hour on Gary Cohn. I know he's gone now, but to get a one-year job just to get out of paying millions, probably hundreds of millions in taxes while he's pushing horrible policies on the president, no, I can't. I can hear about that all day.
Great. By the way, absolutely great idea. Send us your targets for Swamp Watch at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. Kimberly.
Okay, yeah, so obviously I think the whole point is you want transparency and you want efficiency in government and honesty. So the Office of Government Ethics has been under some criticism for quite some time now, and probably with good reason. Seems to be a little bit disorganized, needs some overhaul. I'm sure when the president's able to turn fully his attention on that, he'll do something very good with it, and especially in the light of like programming like yours that actually exposes some things that need to be addressed. So I think this is just the beginning of what needs to happen in D.C., and they need to do a better job there in terms of their compliance and making sure that the oversight is what it needs to be.
Yeah, and also, actually, one thing I should also point out to our viewers is that there's a really interesting story about the Office of Government Ethics and this, they're pursuing the president over the emoluments clause, and there's a sort of case going on. There's a lot of swampiness around that, and we will bring that to you any week now. Jason, any more thoughts on this?
No, I love this stuff. I was the chairman of the Oversight Committee.
Right.
It was founded in 1814. Abraham Lincoln, when he went to Congress, actually served on the committee that was done this. He chased after the President of the United States, President Polk, because he did not believe where the Mexican-American War started. That's how Abraham Lincoln got his start.
He didn't believe what?
He did not understand and believe. Where was the spot, Mr. President, the Mexican-American War actually started? Where was that spot? It reminded me of Benghazi, when all of a sudden you had Clinton and Panetta and everybody saying, oh, well, yeah, there was this video. And I was like, oh, you know what? That is the inspiration for me. And he actually sat on with the present day Oversight Committee.
Very good. Well, there you are. Appropriately enough for Father's Day. Last word to Jason Chaffetz. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. That was great. Coming up, fake news about the G7 summit. But wait till you hear who it's from. That's after the break. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get into it. Wilbur Ross, the Office of Government Ethics and all that. It seems to me, Jason, that the Office of Government Ethics and the ethics rules generally are actually the real problem here.
Well, yes. Look, openness and transparency, I believe in it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. You want to draw sunshine to it if you want to clean up the mess. And wherever that takes you, it takes you. But the Office of Government Ethics has been a bit of a joke. A while ago, we got the report as to which personnel within each department and agency were actually paying their taxes. They're taking taxpayer dollars. And guess who had the lowest compliance rate of paying their federal taxes? The Office of Government Ethics.
That's brilliant.
It was
Subject of a new
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
We're going to do Swamp Watch. That's, oh my, I mean, that's.
You have almost 100,000 federal workers that don't pay about $1 billion a year in taxes, and they take money from the taxpayers. I would love to come to a segment about that.
That's a promise.
Well, I told you I'm friends with Wilbur Ross, so I found his response totally persuasive and can't believe you are picking on an honorable man. But there are other people I think you could be picking on, and I think you should suggest that viewers send in their nominations.
Brilliant.
I would like an entire hour on Gary Cohn. I know he's gone now, but to get a one-year job just to get out of paying millions, probably hundreds of millions in taxes while he's pushing horrible policies on the president, no, I can't. I can hear about that all day.
Great. By the way, absolutely great idea. Send us your targets for Swamp Watch at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. Kimberly.
Okay, yes. So obviously, I think the whole point is you want transparency and you want efficiency in government and honesty. So the Office of Government Ethics has been under some criticism for quite some time now, and probably with good reason. Seems to be a little bit disorganized, needs some overhaul. I'm sure when the president's able to turn fully his attention on that, he'll do something very good with it, and especially in the light of like programming like yours that actually exposes some things that need to be addressed. So I think this is just the beginning of what needs to happen in D.C., and they need to do a better job there in terms of their compliance and making sure that the oversight is what it needs to be.
Yeah, and also, actually, one thing I should also point out to our viewers is that there's a really interesting story about the Office of Government Ethics and this, they're pursuing the president over the emoluments clause, and there's a sort of case going on. There's a lot of swampiness around that, and we will bring that to you any week now. Jason, any more thoughts on this?
No, this is. I love this stuff. I was the chairman of the Oversight Committee.
Right.
It was founded in 1814. Abraham Lincoln, when he went to Congress, actually served on the committee that was done this. He chased after the President of the United States, President Polk, because he did not believe where the Mexican-American War started. That's how Abraham Lincoln got his start.
He didn't believe what?
He did not understand and believe. Where was the spot, Mr. President, the Mexican-American War actually started? Where was that spot? It reminded me of Benghazi, when all of a sudden you had Clinton and Panetta and everybody saying, oh, well, yeah, there was this video. And I was like, oh, you know what? That is the inspiration for me. And he actually sat on with the present day Oversight Committee.
Very good. Well, there you are. Appropriately enough for Father's Day. Last word to Jason Chaffetz. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. That was great. Coming up, fake news about the G7 summit. But wait till you hear who it's from. That's after the